I was a good boy all year. Now it's time for a little fun.
I like being bad. It makes me happy.
These are 10 more of my most overrated metal albums, and we're starting with Avenged, Sevenfold, and City of Evil. Now remember, it's not a bad albums list, just ones that seem overly praised to me. I do think that virtually every album on this list does have good things about it. For one, signing to Warner Bros. Records definitely shines through in the production, and M. Shadow's vocal coaching with Ron Anderson, who also worked with Axl Rose and Chris Cornell, also shows in his performance. Some fantastic songs on here like The Beast and the Harlot, Bat Country, and Trashed and Scattered. The real problem for me is that despite the obvious improvements, I still find Shadow's more nasally moments really off-putting on tracks like Burn It Down and Strength of the World. I also really don't think that this thing justifies the nearly 73-minute runtime and would be much tighter at like 40 to 45 minutes. Possibly further hot takes, I don't like Seize the Day, Betrayed, or Sidewinder. Cool ideas but often poor execution. In spite of some of its weaknesses, give me the self-titled over this one any day.
SMH, bro.
Next up is Insomnium with Shadows of the Dying Sun. Now, I love this band and think that they honestly don't have a weak album, but I just don't understand why this is the big breakout record, hitting number 2 on the Finnish charts and number 5 on Billboard Heatseekers. Obviously, While We Sleep is a fantastic single and maybe one of the best tracks the band has ever put together. That said, I think it's definitely one of their most uneven albums with some of the most downtime between those high peaks. There are songs I absolutely love, like Collapsing Words and Ephemeral, and others that aren't bad but just strike me as a little forgettable, like Lose Tonight. It's hard to put my finger on exactly what's off on this one for me, but something about it just keeps me from staying engaged. It has more of a kind of sleepy catatonia vibe, I guess, which just isn't really my thing. Give me virtually any of their other albums over this one, but especially Winter's Gate. Then the most recent album on this list, we have Sleep Token with Take Me Back to Eden. I, for the life of me, do not understand the love for this band in general, but I was especially surprised by the cult-like praise I saw for this album, which basically only Anthony Fantano made me feel like I wasn't going insane.
It's not that much different than what you might hear on an Imagine Dragons record, a top 40 randomized Frankenstein monster, masquerading as something deeper than it actually is. The music in some cases couldn't be more plain as day and crude, painfully melodramatic, over-enunciated, and processed to high heaven.
I've never agreed more with this man in my life. There are some solid and interesting moments on here like Euclid, but for the most part, I'm just really not into the whole Hozier meets Gent vibes of the album. The vocals just feel so try-hard to me and constantly remind me of all these sad preteens on the subreddit drooling over every melodramatic note.
He's just so dreamy.
But I think what bothers me the most is the praise for the diversity of their sound when none of the elements feel like they gel together. It's like oil and water constantly. Contrast that with a band like Zeal and Ardor that also uses a lot of counterintuitive elements but fuse them much more successfully in my opinion. Again, interesting ideas, but it just does not come together for me. We have plenty more albums to go, but if you're not already raging at me in the comments, go ahead and share which ones you agree with and disagree with as well. And hey, if you're enjoying the video, hit the like button as well. Ooh, then we have Cattle Decapitation with Death Atlas. Now, once more, say it with me, I do not dislike this album. In fact, I ranked it quite highly on the discography tier list I did earlier this year. I just see a lot of people calling it their best album, and I don't agree at all. Plenty of bangers on here, like Bring Back the Plague, but then I find these somewhat simplistic compositional foundations of tracks like Vulturous leaving a little bit of something to be desired. I also think that the interludes are just a waste of time, and I end up skipping them for the most part. I get that they play into the concept, but I just could really care less. Your concept should never get in the way of a seamless listening experience. Then there's the singing on the final track, which is performed well enough, but I just don't think that it quite earns the emotional weight that it's going for. If you ask me, the new album Terrasite pulled this off much more successfully, but personally, I still think that the Anthropocene Extinction bodies them all any day of the week. Then we have Ex-Hoarder with Slaughter in the Vatican and The Law.
Stop it. Get some help.
The number of people mentioning these albums being left out of both the thrash metal and groove metal lists was insanely high, and I'll admit that that was because I hadn't heard it yet at the time. So with those sky-high expectations, I threw this thing on expecting to be blown away, but instead it was more like... Look, the guitars and drumming are great, but so is the guitar work on any number of other classic albums in this genre, and I'm just not willing to sit through these vocals when there are just much better options available. I know some people are down for this style, but as I've said before, there are only a handful of vocalists who can actually pull it off, and this guy is not one of them. It sounds like he's trying to pull a Phil Anselmo, but just ends up sounding like an annoying, cheap knockoff. I can barely get through this album, and I'd much rather be listening to Pantera or Overkill instead. Twisting the knife even further, we have Bolt Thrower with The Fourth Crusade and War Master. Now overall, I'd say that Bolt Thrower fans weren't too bad when it came to the ranking I did with Tom, but both of these albums frequently came up as points of contention in the comments. Now to be fair, I'm just not big on doom in my death metal, so whenever the band goes in that direction, I tend to check out, and there is a lot of that on these albums. The Fourth Crusade in particular was apparently inspired by Candlemass and Pentagram, which might as well be sleeping pills to me.
That's illegal. That's illegal.
Compositions just don't feel as interesting, and the doomier parts just aren't made for someone like me who mostly prefers balls-to-the-wall aggression. I've tried a number of times to see if coming back will make me change my mind, but so far I haven't had much luck. For me, it's all about For Victory and Those Once Loyal, much more dynamic songwriting, better pacing, and memorable riffing, if you ask me. Then we have Exodus with Fabulous Disaster. When it comes to these lists, I find the more legendary the album, the more fun the conversation. I don't make up an opinion explicitly to ruffle feathers, but if I genuinely have an opinion that just happens to do that, why wouldn't I share it?
Destroy it!
So it goes with this album that frequently gets listed as one of the band's crowning achievements. Starting with the good, the last act of Defiance is a great opener with these sick D-beats and great gang vocals on the chorus. And then of course the title track has one of the most earworm thrash choruses of all time in general, and the Toxic Waltz is one of my all-time favorites as well. But to me, a truly great album is great start to finish, and personally, I think that this one has just as many duds as classics. I don't love Cajun Hell or Like Father Like Son, and I could definitely do without the Lowrider cover, which is a song I already hate in general, but they make even cornier. Again, good album, but if you ask me, Pleasures of the Flesh is underrated and way more consistent overall. Next up is In Flames with Clayman. The second time In Flames has made one of these lists, but I'm ready for this pick to actually replace the previous one. This is yet another album I see raised up as one of the band's best overall, but if you ask me, it has two great tracks and a whole lot of meh outside of that. Bullet Ride and Pinball Map are always mainstays in my In Flames playlist. Killer riffs, punchy songwriting, all of their best qualities on display. Only for the Weak is also pretty solid on the more atmospheric side, but I've just never been in love with this album as a start to finish listen. It sets the bar so high, and then the rest of it just feels like kind of a chore in comparison. When it comes to their early albums, I'd be much more likely to recommend Colony. I just think that that album does everything this album does, but better. Then there's Testament with Practice What You Preach. It's been a thrash listening kind of year, so it's only natural that a bunch of thrash albums would make this list. I love Testament's first two albums, but this 1989 outing takes a turn for the worse, if you ask me. I definitely hear the influence of Metallica on this one, with the title track even sounding like it could have been on Master of Puppets. The trouble is we don't need another Metallica. We already have one, and I'm definitely not a big fan of the slower songs here like Envy Life.
Boring.
The album definitely resonated with a larger audience as this was their first to enter the top 100, but even the band doesn't play many of these songs live anymore. Frankly, it's one of my least favorite of their discography. Just a year later, they dropped the far superior Souls of Black, which is by no means perfect, but brings back more of that pure thrash energy that I'm looking for. And then we have Children of Bodom with Hatebreeder. I know that longtime fans love them, the 90s material, but if I'm being brutally honest, I don't think that Children of Bodom truly hit their stride until Follow the Reaper and definitely Hate Crew Death Roll. The great performances were definitely there when it came to the instruments, but goddamn, those early vocals are rough. Much like I said with Ex-Hoarder, the Jarl is this album's downfall, and they get especially bad on the cover of No Commands. Alexi is a superstar on the guitar, but he's never been the best vocalist, and it particularly shows on both this and Something Wild the most. Plenty of great songs and riffs, but unfortunately a lot of them marred by some pretty questionable singing. And once more, I'm going to raise up Are You Dead Yet as the underrated album in the discography. That one is packed with hooks and far fewer performance issues. Y'all check out this playlist for all of my most overrated albums videos so far, and let me know down in the comments what do you think are the most overrated metal albums of all time and why. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.